First, the general form of a reciprocal graph is y equals k over x, where k is a real number and x is not equal to 0. X cannot be 0 because we don't want the denominator to be equal to 0, because a number divided by 0, you won't be able to define the value of it. That is why there's the restriction. Now let's look at the features. Look at the first quadrant, this section. Now you see that the x coordinate can get bigger and bigger and bigger, and the graph will be getting closer and closer to the x coordinate, x axis, but will never touch the x axis and will never cross it. So we say the x axis is becomes what you call the horizontal asymptote. Now I want you to understand some terminologies here, and I'll be using them interchangeably. X axis is called y equals 0. So when you hear me say x axis or y equals 0, they mean the same thing. Y axis is called x equals 0. So no, x axis y equals 0, y axis x equals 0. So we see in the first quadrant, the x axis or y equals 0 is called the horizontal asymptote, because the graph gets closer and closer to the x axis as the value of x coordinate increases. Conversely, as x values get smaller and smaller and smaller, the graph gets closer to the y axis or x equals 0. So we call this the vertical asymptote. So we can say that when you draw a reciprocal graph, you see that the graph will be asymptotic to both the x axis and the y axis. In other words, the graph will be asymptotic to both x equals 0, y equals 0. When you come to this section, to the same thing, asymptotic to both y axis and x axis. Now, this is the positive section of the graph. This is the negative section of the graph. It is not joined simply because our x cannot be 0. That's why it's disjoint. Okay. Now let's look at an example how to draw.